Okay, I think we are ready to start now. So hello again and welcome everyone. My name is Manca Shvara and I welcome you to our February's Psychosocial Wednesdays meeting together with Mikhail Stankiewicz from the Jungianeum team. We are part of the Jungianeum team who develops contemporary initiatives for analytical psychology in neo-Jungian studies. Jungianeum mission is rooted in the belief that meaningful conversations are more important than ever in today's world. That's why our team is dedicated to bringing you new speakers each season, people we believe have valuable insights to share. We are also passionate about books, and this year has already seen some exciting new Jungian releases, and more are about to come. You can find them on Amazon at affordable prices, and we truly appreciate your support. A quick introduction for those who may be new to Psychosocial Wednesdays. Each episode is recorded, so it will be this one, and upload it to YouTube, so you can watch it later, catch up if you missed it, or share it with anyone who couldn't attend. And of course, a big thank you to everyone joining us live today. I'm very excited and honored to present you our speaker today, Keiron Le Grice. Keiron is a professor of depth psychology in the Jungian and Archetypal Studies specialization at Pacifica Graduate Institute in California, and the author of several books, including The Archetypal Cosmos, The Rebirth of the Hero, and the forthcoming multi-volume The Way of the Archetypes. He is also co-editor of Jung on Astrology, a compilation of Jung's writings on the topic, and co-founder and former editor of Archetypal, the Journal of Archetypal Cosmology, now serving as editorial advisor. The name of today's talk is Cosmos and Zeitgeist, an archetypal astrological analysis of the 2020s. Archetypal astrology is based on a demonstrated correlation between cosmology and the psychology of the unconscious. It studies correspondences between the movements of the planets in their orbits and the manifestation of the archetypes, universal themes, energies, and patterns in human experience. Focusing on the sequence of three major astrological alignments, the so-called world transits, between 2020 and 2025, Keiron will seek to illuminate the archetypal themes and dynamics shaping the recent past and the current historical moment. Specifically, the talk will consider geometric alignments of Saturn with Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune in relation to the dominant events and challenges of this period, including the COVID crisis, political and cultural polarization, and the traumatic conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. Attuning to the archetypal dimension of history through astrology can help us find perspective and to better recognize the deeper meanings and powers living through us. I'm really excited for this talk today, Keiron, so the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Manca, for the introduction and for all the work you've done to arrange the event. As my first time at Psychosocial Wednesdays, it's nice to see some familiar faces. It looks a little bit like a Pacifica outpost. Susan and Lionel, I can see you both. So as Manca said there, I'm going to be talking to you tonight, for some of you, about archetypal astrology, and I will make no or few prior assumptions about your knowledge of astrology, but I gather most of you here will be somewhat oriented towards Jungian psychology, at least, which is great, and that will give us a good basis for understanding. I should also say that I'm covering a lot of territory in terms of, I mean, even 5 years of history these days is so loaded with events. So I won't be going into great detail in any of those events. It'll be more like the headlines. My aim is to draw out the universal themes, that is the archetypal themes in historical events, to see through the concrete manifestation of events to their archetypal reason, the archetypal cause behind them. And I should also say that with astrology, you can't predict the future. I mean, this may be an obvious statement, but I think in the minds of many, people think of Nostradamus and so forth, with that predictive element. Now, it might be for certain people with psychic intuitive abilities that they're able to use astrology to project into the future, but by and large, just using astrology, all we can do is help to reveal the universal framework of meanings. So astrology is to do, at least the kind of astrology I'm concerned with, archetypal astrology, is to do with universals, the grand lines, the big themes, and not the specific details. So you can't tell by looking at a certain configuration of planets what's going to happen. Okay. So astrology is based on a presumed and I think demonstrated correlation between the positions and movements of the planets in the solar system and certain defined archetypal principles, powers in the unconscious. And I see this as a kind of synchronistic correspondence rather than a planet physically causing something to happen in the human psyche or causing an event on Earth. I think we can understand this better following Jung himself as a kind of synchronistic correspondence between the psyche and the cosmos. So you'll have to just kind of accept that assumption. Another talk, maybe I could go into details on how astrology works, but basically this idea that there's some kind of unity, underlying ground that behind the psyche and the cosmos, and this single reality is ordered by the same set of principles. Now, what we're concerned with in looking at about a 5-year period of history is that the movements of the planets, planets in relation to Saturn. Our main concern is going to be Saturn, which I'll explain in a moment. And all you need to know about the methodology of astrology is that we're concerned with when two planets, two or more planets, form significant angular geometric relationships with each other in the sky. Now, you will know of the zodiac, I'm sure, that each planet is plotted in a particular sign, in a particular degree of the zodiac at any given time. And you can track the movements of the planets over time around the zodiac. And they move at different speeds. So Saturn takes about 29 years to go around the zodiac, where it takes over 200 years for Pluto. Uranus is 84 years. So they're all moving at different speeds. And as they move in their orbits, they will form geometric alignments periodically. So, for example, at some point, Saturn will be opposite to Pluto. At another point, Saturn will be 90 degrees from Pluto. It's called a square. And at another time still, Saturn and Pluto will be together in the sky within about a 15-degree range, and that's called a conjunction. So we're looking at these particular geometric configurations. Now, in seeing that Saturn and Pluto are together in the sky in a conjunction, close to each other in the sky, that tells us that the corresponding archetypes, the Saturn archetype, the Saturn principle power, is in relation to the Pluto principle. And so you get the themes of Saturn combine in creative, often challenging and quite powerful and vivid ways with the themes of Pluto. So it's like this inner outer correspondence. And astrology is a great tool, I think, because it gives us an external frame of reference so we can understand which particular archetypes are activated at any particular time. Otherwise, it's kind of you're just recognizing the archetypes for yourself in your own psyche. But astrology gives us something to we can point to outside of us, right? So that's the basic idea. Now, I'm going to be looking at Saturn, and so I'll just briefly describe the nature of Saturn, and then we're going to look at Saturn Pluto. This is chronologically Saturn Pluto, Saturn Uranus, Saturn Jupiter if there's time, and Saturn Neptune. They're the four aspects, alignments, or transits, as they're called, that I intend to focus on. So I'll describe Saturn, then I'll bring in the other archetypes as we go along. Okay, so Saturn, even people who don't know astrology tend to know of Saturn because of the Saturn return, right? And this is a period in life when you're about 28, 29, 30. It's difficult, challenging. It's often a major restructuring time of life. So people tend to have heard of the Saturn return. And even within astrology, perhaps especially within astrology, Saturn has a rather negative people have a rather negative view of the planet, the archetype. Traditionally, it's to do with problems and misfortunes. It's called the Great Malefic in traditional astrology, but its meaning is not essentially negative. It's to do with pressure, limitation, time, particularly the slow passage of time, when it feels like things slow down, when things are heavy, and you're being forced to face certain things, to do your duty, to fulfill your responsibilities. Saturn builds backbone. It has a lot to do with the moral virtues, patience and fortitude, steadfastness, conscientiousness, all the traits that we might admire and try to cultivate in our own lives are Saturnian. So it's not negative in that sense. It's to do with judgment, like the perception of whether things are working, whether we're meeting the standard, how things appear to others. Hand in hand with that, there's a dimension of the shadow that is Saturnian. That is the experience of guilt, judgment and guilt, shame, embarrassment, self-consciousness. So the inferior side of the personality, that dimension of the shadow, it pertains to Saturn. Death, like finitude, the end of things. Not only the end of life, but it can be the end of anything. Closure is Saturnian, as is the boundary, the obstacle. Saturn has a lot to do with wisdom, maturity, getting older and getting wiser. And so in that sense, it's to do with the Senex archetype and also the wise old man. And superego, and a Freudian idea of the superego is Saturnian, so that introjected moral authority, patriarchy is Saturnian, like the hard hand of the father, the rules, the laws. All these things have something to do with this larger principle of Saturn. So it kind of subsumes these more specific Jungian and depth psychological principles. And you see this you experience Saturn in your own life. We all do in our own lives. And you can experience it acutely during particular phases of your life. And also we can experience it collectively. And that's what I'm concerned with today. Okay, so we're going to look first of all at when Saturn was in a conjunction, that is close in the sky to Pluto. And this was from, I'll give you the dates, February 2018 to December 2021. February 2018 to December 2021. And Saturn and Pluto were exactly conjunct, that is, in the same degree of the zodiac, same minute, on January the 12th, 2020. Now, in this case, rather unusually, it wasn't just Saturn and Pluto that were together, but at one point in March, in the middle of March 2020, there was a four-planet conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And those four planets were themselves in a 90-degree square aspect to Uranus. I'll show you the chart in a moment. But we're just going to think about Saturn and Pluto for simplicity. Pluto is the principle of power, like the power drive, the will to power in a Nietzschean sense, underworld power, depth. It's a principle of depth, Pluto. So the underworld, that which was deep and profound, like elemental power, the power of nature is Plutonic. It's quite intense in the way it manifests, intense and extreme. So Pluto is this like relentless, inexorable force that drives things on and on in a kind of unrelenting manner. Nature's power, the power in nature's depths. It's connected to instinct, both power drives and also kind of sexual element of instinct, as in Freud's notion of the id. That's very Plutonic. So Nietzschean will to power, Freudian id, um, both related to Pluto, as is rebirth, the whole rebirth process of things being destroyed and recreated. There's like Shiva-like quality to Pluto. Okay, so let's think about what was happening around that time. Now, obviously, the major historical correlation at that time was COVID, right? I mean, and the experience of COVID was just saturated with Saturn Pluto themes. And if you look back to other periods of history when Saturn and Pluto were in major alignment, you see similar kind of moments of powerful historical contraction, almost sometimes traumatic uh, episodes, like the beginning of the First World War, the beginning of the Second World War, at the start of the Cold War, the discovery of AIDS in the early 80s was also under a Saturn Pluto. Um, you can look back through history and you get these 9/11 and 2001, of course. Look back through history at major Saturn Pluto periods, and they're all in some ways they leave an indelible mark on the collective psyche, like intense, like defining experiences. Often, the experience of those times can be like a pressure cooker, where you've got Saturnian limitation and Plutonic power, like the inexorable, relentless power of Pluto meeting Saturn, which is resistance, negation, fear, judgment. All these Saturnian things are driven by Pluto at these times. So obviously, these themes, many of them were very much in evidence during COVID. So I'll just show you, share my screen. So this is, hopefully you can see that okay. I gather there are a couple of floating black boxes on my screen, and we've not been able to understand where they come from, but hopefully you can still see this okay. I'm not going to zoom in much more. All we're interested in here, this is a chart for 20th of March 2020, which is I think it's exact to the day when COVID lockdown was announced in the US. And I know there were different dates in other places, but it fairly representative of that moment of 2020. And so you see right here, this is a symbol for Saturn, and this is a symbol for Pluto. It's like a P and an L combined. And I mentioned the four planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, an incredibly powerful four-planet conjunction. So if you just think about what was happening during COVID, it's kind of difficult to look back. It's still fairly raw, I'm sure, for many of us. But just like death, bodies being piled up on the streets, locked down, people in suits and masks, not being able to leave your house, not being able to travel, not being able to leave the country, having to work from home, and all these conditions just creating a sense of well, driven by fear, like when's this going to end? How bad is it going to be? Like, just creating this like pressure cooker situation. And I think it's typical of Saturn Pluto that Saturn is a block. Like it restrains, it limits, it negates. And what it negates in the case of Saturn Pluto periods is libido, the outward expression of libido. So Pluto is the libidinal drive in a Jungian sense, right? The life power that flows out of the unconscious. And when Saturn and Pluto are together, you often get a blocking of libido. So the energy that you might ordinarily expend in the acts of life, going to your job and seeing friends and doing the things you enjoy doing, all that you couldn't do, of course. So it has the effect of containing, like almost alchemically containing the energy, the power of Pluto, and thereby activating the unconscious. And it's kind of through that dynamic, that rebirth, transformation, facing oneself, self-knowledge, all those good Jungian things that we know about and that are very important for individuation, all those things are correlated with Saturn Pluto. But obviously it's quite difficult to say the least, to see that kind of positive psychological value when you're in the midst of a crisis. And Saturn Pluto does tend to be quite traumatic. And it's the combination of trauma in many ways, but it also is very fortifying. Saturn is like backbone and like moral gravitas, and Pluto empowers that. So standing up to face the trauma, marshalling all one's resources to face a crisis. These things are substantially mold the character. Saturn Pluto periods invariably are not pleasant, to state what is perhaps obvious, but they have the effect of releasing or bringing to the surface often deeply buried fears. Saturn is fear, right? And Pluto is depth, and so it can really activate latent fears, fear of incarceration, fear of death, and how then do you deal with those darker, usually repressed emotions? Saturn Pluto also represses in itself, because Saturn is the principle of repression, like negation. It just shuts down very quickly on things we don't like. Like it's the judge that creates the shadow. And so Pluto Saturn can be extreme repression, like where you just can't deal with the trauma, and then it just shuts down. So it's not obviously not straightforward in how we deal with Saturn Pluto, but if we know of those themes and we can try and hang in there when we're going through a Saturn Pluto period, it can enable us to recognize, at least in retrospect, some of the psychological value of that time. So that was the main event of COVID. It predated Saturn Pluto conjunction predated COVID by a couple of years, but often you get, like with 9/11, you get one defining event that really shapes the zeitgeist of that time. And probably COVID began some estimates now place it in the middle of 2019, when the virus was probably first manufactured. That seems to be the latest line of thinking. So right in the middle of that period, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction period is when the virus seemed to emerge, and then it really obviously took hold in 2020. So I would say the first months, maybe the first year of the COVID crisis, were predominantly defined by Saturn-Pluto themes. And then a little later on, we moved more into Saturn Uranus. You can see there a thin red line. So even when COVID began, it was Saturn Uranus and Saturn Pluto. So I'll say a little bit now about Uranus, and this is even more relevant, I think, to us today, because it's a little bit more recent. So the Saturn Uranus period extended from February 2019 through to December 2023. So it's only passed fairly recently, and it was exact three times. Sometimes you get a phenomenon known as retrograde motion, where it appears that planets move backwards through the zodiac. They don't, obviously, in reality, but from our vantage point on Earth, given the relative speeds of the movements of the planets, you get this phenomenon where it looks like planets move backwards. So therefore, you can get two planets will form a square, and move apart, and then one will appear to move backwards, form the square again, and then it will move forwards again and form the square for a third time. And that's what happened with Saturn and Uranus. So the exact transits were, the exact transits tend to be when it's most powerful, right? So February 17th, 2021, June 14th, 2021, and then December 24th, 2021. So all through that year, beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, 2021, very dominated by Saturn Uranus themes, but it extended all the way through to the end of 2023, and it was close to exact, not quite in a square, but very close to it in October 2022. So it's really defined the last 2-3 years. Now Uranus is has a trickster-like quality. It flips things on their heads. It reverses. It's often sudden, unexpected. So sudden, unexpected change, energy that's breaking in out of the unconscious that often catches us off guard. And it's like often like a split off energy or energy that's not well integrated or even recognized in the psyche, whether it's one's own psyche or the collective psyche. So emergent trends, the avant-garde, the countercultural, often minority viewpoints, the new, broadly speaking, like new life or new direction coming in, shaping the collective zeitgeist. And it's to do with freedom, liberation, emancipation, rebellion, revolt. All these things are to do with the Uranus principle. So even from the beginning of COVID, when you got an expression like the new normal, this is the new normal, right? You can't go to work, you're working from home, and the way that this sense that things had kind of irrevocably but suddenly and unexpectedly changed. So the new is Uranus, and the normal, like the normal functioning of the world, is Saturnian. The structure of things, going to do one's job, like the things that you have to attend to, responsibilities and so forth. So the new normal is a thoroughly Saturn-Uranus sentiment idea. And that sense that you often heard this at the time that the world had been turned on its head, right? And so that's Uranus acting on Saturn. Then you've got the idea of necessity as the mother of invention, to quote the old saying. Saturn, necessity, things that we have to do, things that we should do, things that we ought to do, like that sense of existential pressure, like that's Saturnian, when you feel like, yeah, I've got to do this. And invention then is Uranus. So everyone moving suddenly to Zoom, online working. It'd be one expression of that, where the innovation, the new, is elicited by the pressure of circumstance. That seems to be typical of Saturn Uranus periods, and it often correlates historically with moments of high tension. Saturn Pluto is like unrelenting crisis, deep trauma, profound. Saturn Uranus is more like edgy, the breaking point when things might break or they might not, but things are right on the edge of that tense moment of breaking. So like the collapse of Lehman Brothers, late 2007, 2008, that was Saturn Uranus. Pluto was there too, but um, so, a Black Monday stock market crash in '87, Saturn Uranus, Y2K book, right at the end of the '90s. I was working in IT at the time, and it's just like this sense that all the IT systems in the world might collapse because we now need 4 characters for the year rather than 2. Like a small thing, but it's like when you get to uh, New Year's Eve 1999, it's like on the edge of collapse. So that's typical of Saturn Uranus. Um, so obviously COVID was still prominent to say the least then. And what I'm showing you now is, so this is a little later. This is 9th of September 2021. And I'm a little US centric, partly because I was living in the US, but I think what I'm saying and what I'm going to say applies to many, if not all, parts of the world. So this is when the Biden administration announced vaccine mandates, and that was 9th of September 2021. In other countries, the mandates came in like January 2022, early months of 2022, like Austria, France, New Zealand, there were kind of countries who were kind of leading the mandates. So what we have here then is still Saturn, which is here, square to Uranus, which is here. So it's the same square in the same period. Saturn in this case is the authority, right? The rule, the law, you must, you should, and Uranus in this case as uh, the principle attuned to freedom, like the individual's freedoms. You got at this time this like tension as if between Saturnian parents and Uranian dissenters, like, in the eyes of some at least, adolescent, like more teenage, freedom-oriented people. And it was a very kind of tense dialectic. And you can often see this during Saturn-Uranus periods where you get splintering, like splitting the division of society, splintering into different groups with sharp dividing lines between people on one side and people on the other. So you got some people more attuned to like fear of the spread of the virus, other people more attuned to their individual freedoms and rights and to choose what they do with their body. And that was really, really tense, of course, at that time. I mean, you see a similar thing with Roe versus Wade repeal, which I'm sure most of you know, and if you're not America, it's the main abortion case, Roe versus Wade, and that was repealed in 2022, and then that elicited June 2022, and that elicited again the sharp societal division between people who are more pro-choice, like wanting to have the right to choose an abortion if they wish, and people who are more pro-life. So it's another illustration, this kind of jagged, you're on one side or you're on the other kind of split that you get with Saturn Uranus. And it's also trickster-like. I mean, you see this, for example, you could be on the side of pro-choice in the Roe versus Wade abortion issue, but you could be on the side of Uranus, right? And at the same time, you could be on the side of Saturn pro mandates when it comes to COVID. And another way this came through was the sudden shifting of laws, of rules, and like how many people can you mix with? Do you need to wear masks? Yes or no? I remember I was in the UK for some of this time, and you could like mix with 3 households, or the rule of 6. You can mix with 6 people, and the next day you would see a politician, without a mask and like in a party or something, and so you've got lawmakers Saturn, who are in charge of the rules, becoming lawbreakers, Uranus, dissenting, rebellion, and then suddenly changing laws. Like Uranus is a trickster that suddenly flips around the rules. So one day you can do one thing, one day you can do another. I remember where I was in Wales for some of the time. You couldn't leave the county, like, and the county line was maybe a mile away. So you could drive 10 miles in one direction, but you could drive 1 mile in the other direction. It was kind of like crazy Uranian trickster-like energy in the area of legislation and rules. Similarly, I think the storming of the Capitol building was January 6th, of course, 2021, another major event in the US. Another Saturn-Uranus theme is threat to democracy, like Uranian rebels challenging the Saturnian establishment, the US Senate and the Capitol building, and the threat that posed to democracy with the challenge to the smooth handover of power from the first Trump administration to Biden, another expression of Saturn and Uranus. Same time, you also got prominently the raising of alarms about AI, like warnings about technology, the problematic side of technology. So Saturnian judgment focused on the problem, the risk of Uranian technology. So AI is going to get super powerful and it's going to exceed human intelligence and it's going to enslave us all. I mean, these were the things that were coming out at the time. And if you look now, those things have been like relaxed or overlooked. But it was very pointed at the time. Um, just give you a couple more things. I mean, the Israel-Palestine crisis and the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the nature of those crises is not peculiarly reflective of Saturn and Uranus, but the polarization that goes with them, like you were either pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, and that societal division again, like, and the rebellion, the protest that went with that on university campuses around the world reflects the Saturn Uranus energy as well. Similarly with Russia Ukraine, I mean, I think in that case the vast majority of people were and are on the side of Ukraine, but it got to the point where you couldn't even talk about the factors behind it. There was like a rigid authoritarian clampdown. Saturn, authoritarian, Uranus, individual freedom. So there's something of that tense dialectic between the two. The crisis mode of functioning is typical of Saturn Uranus, and rather like Saturn Pluto, but in a different way, it has the effect of um, bringing fears to the surface through the sudden crisis in order that they can be recognized and expunged, integrated, perhaps. That's a positive value of Saturn Uranus. Also, being forced to stand in one's own authority, like a forced break from the world, where you're isolated in respect of the world. The world, Saturn, consensus reality, dominant narratives, Uranus, the individual. So being forced to like go one's own way, to stand in one's own ground, to have one's own viewpoint. That's another expression of Saturn Uranus that feeds individuation. It serves the individuation process. So let me just show you real quick a couple of more charts. So this is vaccine mandates, Saturn, Uranus, and the with that the Great Resignation, like people being forced to leave their jobs or choosing to leave their jobs during COVID. Uranus breaking free, going one's own way. Saturn, one's employment, the structure of one's life, and things suddenly breaking apart and suddenly changing. This is the Omicron strain, which was announced towards the end of November 2021. See there, Saturn square Uranus. And this both, I think, triggered the mandate because it was seemingly more infectious, but also ultimately when it proved that it couldn't be contained by vaccination, it kind of showed the futility of that measure ultimately. So that's the end of November, and then, excuse me, this is when Omicron really became more well known. And let's get it right zoom here. And you see it's a little closer. So the thicker the line in the chart, the closer the aspect. So you see the slightly thicker red line. So this was the last exact, I think it was the last, yeah, December 24th, 2021, the last exact transit of Saturn Uranus, which seemed to like not draw to a close, but mark the beginning of the end of at least that phase of the transit, right? This is Roe versus Wade, which was June 24th of June 2022. Saturn here, Uranus here. Also, the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd incident occurred during Saturn Uranus. Rebellion against the police, defund the police movement. Even the nature of that incident, when it had both Saturn, Pluto, and Saturn-Uranus qualities. Saturn-Pluto, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Stanislav Grof, but he did a lot of work with Richard Tarnas, a Czech-American psychiatrist. And so they used astrology alongside like perinatal transpersonal psychology, and they found that Saturn-Pluto is to do with Gross model focuses on biological birth, right? And Saturn Pluto is to do with the stage of biological birth when the fetus is in the contracting womb, right? And it kind of feels like the world's closing in. It's to do with suffocation, among other things. And so the George Floyd incident tragically had that Saturn Pluto quality of like constriction and suffocation, and then it elicited Saturn Uranus rebellion, right, against authority. So it had both of those elements were in it. Okay, so let me turn now to Saturn Jupiter. I've got about 15 minutes or so. So let's see. Okay, so you're looking at the inauguration, Trump second term inauguration, January 20th, 2025. Again, sorry about the US centric nature of the talk, but it just seems like often a lot of things that happen in the States do tend to kind of cascade around the world. So, and it really is just to illustrate the nature of these archetypal astrological combinations. So Saturn Jupiter. So Saturn Uranus ended 2023, and then the Saturn Jupiter period, it runs from June 2024 to the middle of last year through to August 2025. So the end of the summer this year. And it's exact August 20th, 2024 was exact August 20th, December 25th last year, last Christmas, and then June the 15th this year. So again, the retrograde motion going back and forth, three exact alignments. It's a little harder to see Saturn Jupiter, I would say, and it happens more frequently because Jupiter's moving much faster. It only takes Jupiter about 12 years to go around the zodiac, and Saturn's 29 years. So you get a lot more Saturn Jupiter periods. However, this one is longer than normal because of the retrograde motion. It's like a bigger deal version of Saturn Jupiter. Um, Things that you can see that are expressions of this transit. Now, Jupiter is the principle of expansion, like the biggest planet. So it has a certain dramatic quality often. It amplifies, it exaggerates, it's to do with growth. It's traditionally positive, seen as positive. So faith, trust, optimism. Saturn is more pessimism, realism, and Jupiter is more optimism, positive openings, opportunities, abundance, sometimes excess and extravagance, too much of a good thing, as well as positive expansion. So if you bring those two together in your mind, Saturn and Jupiter, and there's Saturn. This is January 20th. Now we've got a square, the thin red line to Jupiter down here. It looks like the number 2 with a cross through it. So Saturn square Jupiter. Um, Sweeping government powers, like some would say government overreach. I mean, just think of what's happened, those of you that have followed along with since Trump came into office second time, loads of legislation, lots of executive orders, Saturn, rules, laws, government, Jupiter, expansion, lots of executive orders in many areas of life, Jupiterian breadth, right? So rules extending over many areas of life. Um, some would say overreach, like too much, too many laws in areas that are not appropriate. I'm trying not to be political, and I'm kind of on the outside, kind of British, right? And I have no particular affiliation. So, and I think astrology allows you to be a little more neutral because at least you can see both sides, right? And so even if you have a strong view one way or the other, you can see, I hope, some of the positives. I mean, some of the things that Trump is doing presumably are good. Like one expression of Saturn Jupiter is elimination of the superfluous. Jupiter, like abundance, waste, like too much, and Saturn trims, like limits. Saturn as the judge, like that's wasteful. Cut that back. We're only going to keep what works. Saturn Jupiter is in its quality often very pragmatic. William James, a American philosopher, pragmatist, Saturn Jupiter, right? So whatever works. Another example I often think of is Bruce Lee, the martial artist, who some of you may know, but his like axiom, his motto was eliminate flowery hands, like in martial arts. Just whatever's the most efficient move, that do whatever it takes to defeat your opponent, stay alive. So there's something of that very pragmatic quality in Saturn Jupiter. Um, International trade constraints, Jupiter, commerce around the world, Trump administration, tariffs, like restraints, limits on trade. And with that having a knock-on effect, presumably it's going to happen around the world. The reduction of the budget deficit in the US, again, part of the Jupiterian like overspend, if you like, and Saturn, the Saturnian limitation. Geographical expansion, like Trump wanting to own or buy Greenland and Panama Canal and other things, and that being met with judgment and resistance. So Jupiterian expansion, like around the world, and Saturnian, no, you can't do that. It's like it's not allowed, or it's ridiculous. That kind of judgment. Yeah, so the Elon Musk fronted Doge movement, elimination of the superfluous waste and excess. It's in the nature of Saturn and Jupiter to see the problem, or to see an opportunity in the problem. Jupiterian opportunity in the Saturnian problem. Equally, the opportunity, Jupiter, can be problematic. Like sometimes a feeling with this complex of like, oh, so much work to do. Like it's just like a huge project. Like Saturn is the work, the burden. Jupiter is like. So I don't know about you, but I've spent so much of the last month like in logistical planning. Like even the simplest thing seems to like take forever. I mean, I've got Saturn currently aligned with my own Saturn in my chart, so it's made it and it's made it a little more pointed perhaps, but like just like dealing with immense, endless administrative logistical stuff. So that's also typical. I mean, cutting red tape, another expression of that. In the UK, there's been a pledge by the incumbent Labour government to build 1.5 million new homes. Not that there's any space in the UK for these new homes, but that is the pledge. So a lot, an expansion, new building, and Saturn structures, right? The structure of things like so Jupiter Saturn is this like grand building project. So I mentioned these just to give you examples of the way that the different principles combine, so that when you're looking around, reading the news in Germany or wherever else it might be, you can recognize, oh, that's Jupiter Saturn and coming through in a certain way. So that's we're in that at the moment, and then we're also in 10 minutes just to talk a little bit about Saturn Neptune. So let's see. So this chart is now today, February 12th, 2025. And you will see Jupiter over here and Saturn here. So we've still got Jupiter-Saturn square through to the end of the summer. But also now Saturn and Neptune are in a conjunction. And this is going to be from, well, it started March 2024 or thereabouts, and I'm using like a 15-degree range. But so when Saturn got to within 15 degrees of Neptune, that's when it begins, and it lasts to Saturn is 15 degrees beyond Neptune, something like that. So March 2024 to April 2027. So this is going to be one of the major defining transits, alignments of the next 2, 3 years. And it's going to be close to exact, not quite exact, but close this summer 2025. And in this case, we only get one exact alignment, and that's February 21st, 2026. So about a year from now, it will be exact. It's quite a difficult complex to understand when you're combining Saturn and Neptune, particularly when you've only got a few minutes, but I will try to describe it. So Neptune, keep in mind Saturn, and then Neptune is to do with image, illusion, religion, like the spiritual religious instinct within us. So it's something that a principle that we tend to be quite attuned to in our field. Myth, dreams, ideals, imagining an ideal world, or daydreaming, one's fantasy life. Projection is also Neptunian, like seeing what you want, like wish fulfillment rather than seeing the reality. The reality is Saturn, so there's going to be some kind of tension between that wish fulfillment, projection, idealization, how things could be, should be in one's yearning for an ideal life, and then the Saturnian reality about how are things actually. Like often there's quite a gulf between the reality of things and their ideal potentiality. So that's likely to be to the fore. Neptune tends to dissolve. The way it works, it makes things enchanted, like it gives things an allurement, like that makes them have a magical quality that attracts us, and then often that will sadly prove to be quite insubstantial. So Saturn, Neptune particularly is to do with disillusionment, like or disenchantment. So Neptune in itself is enchantment. Saturn negates, judges, limits, tests the ideal, and often punctures it. So punctures the illusion. So illusion and delusion are to do with Saturn, Neptune. So I think one of the major expressions of Saturn Neptune, one of the major challenges of dealing with that complex is trying to determine what is actually true, what is real, because you get Neptune tends to distort because of that association with projection and so forth. And Saturn is the reality principle in many ways, like what is real. So Saturn can doubt the Neptunian religious experience, or think, oh, my dreams are never going to work out. My Neptunian dreams, yeah, I'm being so unrealistic. Like, I've got to get real, and like, or even sobering up. Like, escapism is Neptunian. Drink, drugs, like Saturn. Okay, now I'm going to be sober. Like, I'm going to end the addiction, or I'm going to struggle against the addiction. I'm going to stop my escapist behavior. That's another expression of Saturn Neptune. It has a correlation also with poisoning. Um, Neptune as water, Poseidon, Neptune, like the god of the sea, and so there is this consistent with that mythic correlation. Neptune is often pertains to water, quite literally, and in the metaphors we might use to describe Neptune, like dissolving and oceanic consciousness, or these kinds of things, like being lost in the fog, being all at sea. These kinds of expressions are Neptunian. Um, Saturn as the problematic, so poisoned water or water leaks. And if you follow like Saturn Neptune periods, you often see stories about like toxic poisoning and water leaks, or even like one guy did a study of Saturn Neptune periods and found that they correlate with building bridges, building tunnels, like structures over water, building cathedrals, where you got Neptune as a religion being housed in Saturnian structure. So like Saturn as the structure that supports the Neptunian spiritual religious inclination. That would be a positive expression of that. Um, just to give you an example, so the term fake news, which we all know too much these days, and now it's like evolved into misinformation and disinformation. But fake news became common language, I think, around 2015 to 2016. Hillary Clinton was one of the first people to use it, and then Trump used it a lot. And so that was the previous Saturn Neptune period, 2014 to 2017. Fake news, like what is real and what isn't? How can I know what is real? How can I know whether a story is real or whether my spiritual experience is real, or am I kidding myself? It's like that dialectic between reality and delusion, confusion, or genuine idealization and religious insight and experience. That is at the heart of Saturn Neptune. So I think that's going to be prevalent. It kind of continued to be prevalent, but since that time. But I think that's going to be important. Um, you get periods of collective malaise often, like a weakening of the will, apathy, almost like defeat. There's that quality with Saturn Neptune, which sounds like it might not be good, right? I mean, you don't want to be morally fatigued and so forth, but in some sense, like if you think about the ongoing conflicts, fatigue might not be a bad thing. Like, the Israel-Hamas conflict, probably a good thing at some point that it's just people are just tired, exhausted, morally, physically, spiritually with conflict. Right? And I feel like there's some of that already. So too, Russia-Ukraine conflict with, how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives of that claimed at some point. I feel like that sense of this is going nowhere, stagnation, which is typical of Saturn Neptune periods, will help to perhaps provide a resolution to those kinds of crises. Um, Historically, again, the Brexit vote and Trump's first election victory were both in 2016, and there's this sense of you know, particularly perhaps Brexit. I mean, I remember I was in the US and I was in favour of the EU. I never thought we would vote to leave, and then I got up the next day and quite a decisive vote to leave the EU in the UK, and a sense of just like a puncturing of an illusion or a reality that one took for granted. And at the time, deflation. I mean, I think since then I've actually come around to being quite glad that happened, but a lot of reasons there. Um, but I think disillusionment with government is typical. So again, the Saturn Neptune theme of disillusionment, Saturn government, like people being more idealistic about what they want, Neptune, and hitting against the Saturnian government and the reality of that. The disillusionment with globalism. I think that really set in around that time because of Brexit, because of the rise of populism, and people felt that they weren't part of like the global agenda and how prominent that's been since then. One specific expression that I've seen, and again, I'm attuned to like UK and the US for obvious reasons. In the UK, they just passed a preliminary assisted dying bill, which is going to be heard, I think, next year. So Saturn Neptune has this, it's like a funeral quality. Saturn death, Neptune sensitivity towards death, compassion towards death, an imagination for death and suffering, the urge to alleviate suffering, all these things at play in and deciding whether it would be a good thing to legally permit suicide, right? Which could easily be abused. I mean, it's a complex issue. So Saturn Neptune can be numbing, suicidal urges. Neptune, the urge to escape. Saturn, the suffering and feeling like trapped and you can never get out of it. That would be on the negative side. More positively, I think working to make things more ideal, building the dream, Neptune, dream, Saturn, like effort, work, accepting that things are not ideal, but working to make things more ideal. And, for all the difficulties of the historical moment, it's not inconceivable that things could get better. And I do feel like we need to cling to that Jupiterian positivity, even in a dark moment. And that Jupiter's still at play, right? It's still involved with, because you've got Saturn Neptune conjunction together right here, and Jupiter still in the square for the next few months. So we got both like high idealism, Jupiter Neptune, and a kind of practical realism, Saturn. So let's hope the gods glued to make things better. And just a couple more things on Saturn Neptune that I meant to mention. So the whole Maha movement, I've taken an interest in RFK Jr., and that he's himself got Saturn Neptune in his birth chart. The urge to purify the food system, like to take the toxins and additives and colors out of the food system. So it's the poisoning theme again with Saturn Neptune and the urge to purify, to end corruption, like the poisoning of the functioning of government and collusion with big tech and big pharma and so forth, particularly big pharma. Neptune is pharmaceuticals. Saturn is like skepticism, doubt, judgment of pharmaceuticals, tackling the opioid crisis, or blocking the influx of fentanyl. Like these things that have become more prominent in the last few months during the US election are expressions of that Saturn Neptune quality. But also conspiracy theories, deciding what is a conspiracy theory and what is true. Often conspiracy theories can become true, but at the time they seem like delusions. So again, a lot of that trying to determine what is real and what isn't. Scams, fakes, frauds, deceptions are all Saturn Neptune themes. But ultimately, again, to end on a positive note, the re-establishment of lost ideals, like bringing back something that's been lost, forsaken, re-enchantment, right, as well as disenchantment. I think that's a theme that's central to Saturn Neptune. I'll end on that note, on a positive, and turn it over to you if you've got any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Keiron. I think we all agree that it was a wonderful and engaging presentation. So I also want to open the floor for questions, and please raise your digital hand. I can see some already, or place the question in the chat. So I can see Bernhard. You have to unmute yourself first. Yeah.
Yes, I have two questions.
Go ahead.
Question number one is astrology, can we compare it with the I Ching? Because you spoke about the synchronistic connection between the position of the planets on one side and, let's say, the picture or the image of the yarrow sticks in the I Ching. Is that comparable?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both synchronistic. I think there are at least two different types of synchronicity discussed by Jung, and he himself kind of makes this distinction, and others have drawn it out more fully. But so astrology, some people see astrology as divination, in which case it would be like I Ching or tarot. And in that view, like you might draw tarot cards or do the I Ching with coins and sticks and so forth, and you just kind of, you're randomly allowing the meaning of the moment to speak, or allowing the unconscious to speak in that seemingly arbitrary act. You could see astrology like that, but in the case of astrology, you've got the permanently you know, as far as we know, the permanent existence of the planets, right? So it's something that is always there. It's not like you're generating a reading. I mean, you generate a chart if you look at where the planets are, but there is this objective frame of reference. So, Jung talks about synchronicity uh, in the moment. I could give you a longer explanation, but I don't have a lot of time. Like Jung describes synchronicity as a causal general orderedness. Like it's a correlation that's always there in the nature of things, and I think astrology taps into that permanent, always existing correspondence between planetary positions, the cosmos, and archetypal activation in the unconscious. Whereas you can have more specific, do a tarot reading. Should I accept this new job? It kind of is like a more precise, lower level, more personal expression of synchronicity. Like you're divining the meaning of the moment, whereas the other synchronicity is more objectively built into the nature of things. So more like a Pythagorean Platonic archetypal order that's transcendent and that manifests in the depths of the psyche, and it manifests in the structure of the universe. That's my view of astrology. So I don't myself see astrology as divination. Although, if you do a reading for someone and you got their chart, what determines what you will see or what you will say or what will happen in during the reading. I mean, that is in some way synchronistic. Suddenly there's a storm or a high wind, and it creates the mood for the reading. There is a like kind of lower level, more precise synchronistic element in the act of doing charts interpretation, but I don't think that means that describes the whole of astrology. For me, there's something more objective in the nature of things that supports astrology. If that makes sense, it's complicated, but
Yeah.
probably the best answer I could give.
Uh, my final question is concerning the practical side of astrology. I mean, astrology is, as the I Ching, a very old method or mapping between archetypes and the planets, or again the hierostics. Uh, but in the old days, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto weren't there.
Yeah,
Mm.
So what are you doing when three planets uh, didn't exist at that time? I mean, they existed, but not
yeah,
in the mind of the old people.
yeah. That's right. I mean, up to the modern era, Saturn was
And,
considered the outermost
and
planet. And
even Pluto has been demoted. He's not at
yeah, I mean that's another issue again. But if you look back at some of the writings of the alchemists, which are more or less all before. Well, I think they are, without exception, before the discovery of Uranus, which was 1780s. Um, they ascribe a lot more to Saturn, to Mars, like the known planets. Where if I'm looking at alchemy now, to me it's thoroughly Plutonic, but they didn't have that as an
okay.
available symbol because they
Yeah.
didn't know that Pluto
So they
existed.
moved it further out.
So the expanded solar system, and of course it's expanded more with the dwarf planets and in recent discoveries, permits a greater differentiation of the archetypal pantheon. Like it gives you more precision. And I also think it's coincided the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in terms of a synchronistic meaningful arrangement with a fuller understanding of individuation. And obviously Jung's the central figure in that. Like Uranus has a lot to do with going one's own way, Neptune, the religious urge, and Pluto, deep transformation, and so forth. It's like it's like the expansion with the telescope of our knowledge of the solar system and beyond has coincided with an expansion of our awareness of the powers at work in the unconscious. And I don't want to overstate that because obviously for most people astrology is irrelevant, right? But it does seem like if you accept a correlation between outer space and inner space, like of the psyche, then it makes sense that as we disclose more of one, we would understand more, at least potentially, of the other. So that's the way I've come to see it. But yeah,
Okay.
you're right. And Pluto's demotion as an astronomical consideration based on like the clearance of orbit of its satellites and its size and stuff. And I wrote a book a few years ago called Discovering Eris, which was about the discovery of the dwarf planet in, I think it was 2005, and then Pluto got demoted in 2006. That doesn't affect Pluto's astrological archetypal significance. It's as powerful as ever.
No, no,
uh,
no. Sure.
astrological.
It was only
Yeah.
a comment about Pluto. The more important one was the relationship, or as you said, the differentiation
Yeah.
in the archetypal interpretation using Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Yes.
Yeah, that's key. Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think Mikael was first, and then Dennis.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was very interesting. Maybe if you could say a few words about the switch of the Saturn Pluto conjunctions in the Earth sign to the air sign, basically, which is happening right now.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it makes a huge difference. At least in my focus has not been on uh, the meaning of planets and signs. I mean, it's a big deal in astrology. Like, if your sun's in Taurus, that means something different than if your sun's in Gemini or whatever it might be. And the same for all the planets. But um, if you look if you look empirically at the manifestation of Saturn Pluto, I'm not saying that signs are irrelevant, but it has the same quality of immense historical contraction, like confronting the shadow and the moral fortitude and marshalling all one's resources. And it's just, it's the same like looking at the First World War, Second World War, whether it's the height of the Vietnam War in the mid 60s or 9/11. You get the same kind of qualitative feel, irrespective of which sign or signs that the conjunctions or the opposition or the square are in. So that might be my blind spot because a lot of astrologers do look at the meaning of like Pluto has just moved into Aquarius and people will attach a lot of significance to that. But for me, that would be more of a background shift in the way that we perceive reality. I don't think it's signals the coming of the new age or spiritual renewal or anything like that, unfortunately. But often astrologers will look at certain factors and think that it's like overstate what it's going to bring. So I'm wary of that. But yeah, so for me, even though I look at signs in my own chart and other people's, in terms of collective stuff, I just focus on the movements of the planets and their alignments. And in that, I'm following Richard Tarnas, who I studied with. He wrote a book in 2006 called Cosmos and Psyche, all about world events and astrology, and no mention of signs in that book. It's just my vantage point. But thank you.
Okay, I think Dennis now.
Yes, you said that astrology is not too predictive, but I'm wondering if I may have some hope here. If I understand you correctly about this Saturn-Neptune conjunction starting in March, and being here in America, we've heard all these incredible, grandiose statements by Trump, what he's going to do, lower inflation, end the wars, make America great again. That to me sounds very Neptunian, but the Saturn hitting that in disenchantment, I think that's what you were saying. I think that has to be setting in. I think it's just beginning to set in with people realizing that all these jobs that the government's cutting out, cutting back on USAID and all that, that's going to have serious consequences. And I think a lot of people are going to be disenchanted. Is that one way that you might read this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in terms of American politics and where we are now with this crazy time we're in?
Yeah, I mean, could be. I mean, I'm hesitant to predict or project into the future too much, but certainly that fits archetypally with the themes. I mean, I think the grandiose is more Jupiter, and Trump's got Mercury, which is speech, ideas, the mind, in aspect to Jupiter and Neptune, and so that's where it comes from through Trump. Yeah, so that's certainly possible. I mean, who knows? I mean, because you could say, well, half of the country are in a Saturn Neptune state of malaise because of the Trump victory, but then the other half of the Trump country are not. So it's not like it's not like you can say everyone's in a Saturn Neptune space right now. I'm just looking at the flyer that popped up there. Great colors again. But yeah, certainly, Dennis, that's a possibility. Because usually there's some disillusionment with Saturn Neptune, particularly when it's coming in, and then you have to accept and face the disillusionment and try and work through that and build towards something that's realistic and can conform more to the ideal. So I think whatever way it manifests, you do get that sense of defeat, world weariness, sometimes a dispiriting, deflated quality. But it's like a necessary disenchantment in order to come through to something more substantial. So yeah, we just got to see how that unfolds. Thank you. Good points.
Okay, I think we have Ruth now. Ruth, hi.
Hi there.
Hi, Ruth.
Thank you. Hi. I just wanted to ask you something about what you said towards the end about RFK, which disturbed me greatly, because if I understood you correctly, you were saying that because the kind of cleansing and so forth is in the air related to some of the insane things he's saying, you seem to be almost endorsing it because it's in the planetary landscape, and that seems completely wrong to me. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to keep myself out of it.
I know that, but you didn't know, did
Yeah.
you? So
I was trying to point to the themes and to maintain a kind of archetypal neutrality. So, I think some of the things RFK is advocating are good things. I think some are more questionable. It's the same with Trump, and it's the same with Biden. I mean, you can get an across the board disillusionment with politics, with Neptune, Saturn, and I think that's quite likely. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to get into my own viewpoint on this, but RFK got that Saturn Neptune attunement in his birth chart. And if you're living with in the wake of the assassination of your father and your uncle, there's a certain paranoid quality you get with Saturn Neptune, kind of conspiratorial thinking, where you don't know what's true, and still today we don't know what's true about those assassinations. So that he got that quality. On the other hand, there's probably cautionary warnings about vaccines and certain pharmaceuticals and the power of the pharmaceutical companies in the US that are valid or at least need to be heard. So, it's just trying to understand what expressions come forth from these different complexes and maybe form judgments later on. That would be my own take on it.
yeah, well, okay, a lot more to say about that, but okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, maybe?
Anything in the chat?
Wait, I have to check.
Hello?
Just
Hello?
hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, but
Gary.
I just had a commentary
Gary, okay.
in speaking about Saturn and Neptune and the new Trump agendas that are taking place before our eyes. You speak a lot about disillusionment and, creating illusions. and disillusionment. I think you've missed the point, aside from disillusionment, because of the restraints on the US aid program. Fact, people today are dying of hunger that wouldn't have died of hunger before Trump took office and literally obtained US aid for his pleasure.
Yeah,
It's
I mean
like
that.
you've been interpreting everything from the vision of the overlords. Oh, and we're worried about disillusionment and what we'll feel and what we'll think. I think you forgot the material aspect of it all, is that poor people are in a worse situation today because of all of it. And it's not because they're disillusioned, it's because they're hungry and need medical care. I also refer to the Thailand-Myanmar border, where the lack
Well,
of foreign
yeah,
aid has
I mean,
already had a very big
I,
impact. So I feel like you're
if I
kind
could
of
just respond
looking
to
at
it, I know we don't
things.
have a lot.
Yeah, we
we
don't have,
a lot of
maybe
time.
just shorter,
Yeah,
Gary.
but obviously there's a lot I could have said. But within an hour, when I'm trying to describe 4 major world transits, I can't really, put myself in a position of people in suffering in various parts of the world. But that what you've articulated there is itself an expression of Saturn Neptune, like compassionate care for those who are suffering. So you yourself are tapping into that Saturn Neptune quality. Equally, the limitation on aid, withdrawal of aid, is Saturnian limitation on arguably Neptunian compassion, right? So both of those things, both the motivation behind the Trump administration's measures and your concern for the suffering, the material suffering of people, both of them express Saturn Neptune. I'm not taking sides or standing in judgment on that. Um, I'm just trying to point out to see through the concrete of what's happening, so we can appreciate the archetypal powers that are moving through all of us. I mean, the archetypal powers move through Trump or RFK or Biden or whoever it might be, and everyone's getting their own experience, and we're not running the show. I mean, that psychology shows us that we are subject to powers beyond our ken, and we're trying to like make sense of them and understand how they come through differently in different people. And I think astrology is a great gift for that. And obviously, everyone's going to have their particular vantage point, and that's going to be shaped by their own experience of the archetypes and their own life experience. But just to try to have that more holistic perspective, I think can be valuable. But certainly, I'm grateful for that reminder about particular groups and how they suffer as a result of legislation. It's undeniable, undeniable. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know who was first, Dennis or Jessica, but maybe 2 more questions. Yeah.
I was just thinking in response to what Ruth Williams said, and RFK and pharmaceuticals. I mean, we just had that nightmare, went on for years here in America with OxyContin and the Sackler family. So there's this really negative, somewhat paranoid feeling about pharmaceutical companies just out to make a buck.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And kind of just said like the negative feeling is Saturnian, right? And Neptune pertains to the whole realm of pharmaceuticals, medicines, drugs, things to alleviate suffering, things that generate altered states of consciousness. It's also Neptunian. So the whole realm of drugs falls under Neptune. But thank you, Dennis.
Okay, Jessica, maybe.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi there. Hi, Keiron. I remember you from a couple of years ago speaking to us at the University of Essex. I don't know if you remember that. I remember I asked you a strange question about the age of Capricorn.
You were the one who asked that question.
That was me. Yeah, I thank you for the talk. I can appreciate that this is obviously a very difficult subject. It puts me in mind actually of how problematic it can be when we talk as Jungians and post-Jungians about the archetypal level, when also that, as somebody very poignant, I think it was Gary, brought up the actual human level. But I can appreciate what you're saying, Keiron, that you want to bring this perspective so that we have these views. But on that note, can we do anything, you know, agency on a personal level? Obviously, there's always this tension, isn't there, between the individual and the archetypal. I mean, my feeling is just, even if I can't, I've got to try, whether that's inflation or not. But what's your view on agency in terms of astrology?
I'll remember this question in 2 years' time. Next time I see you. I mean, my thought, I'm trying to honor the unconscious. So if you feel like that you need to express agency and change things, that too is coming through you, right? It's like if we're in the grip of the hero archetype, then you know we think it's us and we're wanting to do something, but really it's the hero that it could manifest through all of us and does in different ways, and we're like, right, you know, I'm gonna change things, or I'm gonna die trying, and like the whole fantasy comes out of the hero archetype. So I'm not sure the tension between the archetypal and the personal. I totally see what you're saying, of course, but to my mind, that you can only get to the archetypal through the concrete. Hillman said this, like you need, like otherwise it would just be abstract. If I was just showing you charts and talking about the meaning of Saturn Neptune, it only becomes real when you start talking about measures that Trump has taken or ROK or whatever it might be, right? So you need the concrete to house the archetypal. And my other thought was on the dialectic, which and what I said about Saturn and Uranus, like you know, you can still see it now, right? You can see that some things seem like are off the table. Like it's like cancel culture or woke ideology that is so unforgiving. It's like, you know, it invalidates people if they've made mistakes 20 years ago when they were 18, and like, you know, that, and so you can't even bring in different perspectives. I don't feel that that's particularly fruitful. So I feel like if we've got a capacity to, in a good Jungian way, to hold the tension of opposites, right, to recognize the you know, our own mortal weakness on our own tendencies toward judgment, and you know, believing that we're right and everyone else is wrong. I think that can be helpful, but just to engage the opposite viewpoint rather than shut down, and therefore hold the tension even if it's uncomfortable, then we've got some small hope of the transcendent function, right? And some mediating third that can lead us beyond that polarized society that manifested particularly out of COVID and during the Saturn Uranus period. For all those issues I described, we embody that polarization, even though the transit's gone, right? So my hope is that the Saturn Neptune could lead us to some kind of restoration of the possibility of holding different tensions, because Neptune is universal, right? It can universalize more rigid Saturnian positions and dissolve them. So that is a possibility. So I probably didn't quite answer what you were asking, but that's my take on it.
I value your viewpoint, and it's never easy, particularly in just over an hour, to talk about all these things, particularly that, you know, how emotional they are. But I appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, so we are just on time. So thank you, Keiron, also for the structure of your talk and for being so concrete in a way. And I'm afraid our time is up for today. Also, I would like to share maybe the news. You have seen the flyer, and you can see it now, about our first Jungianeum Biennale, Democracy on the Couch. We will organize it in May on the 24th and 25th. Some of the names on the poster, I will read it. Steve Eisenstadt, Naomi Azriel, Paul Bishop, Stefano Carpani, Joseph Cambrai, Police Officer Ez Ulai, Tamar Ron, Elana Lack, Imani Ayat, Brooke Lofer, Noah Florenstein, Artur Nisser, Natalia Pauliskaya, Andrew Samuels, Tom Singer, Mara Stein, Ruth Williams, and Mary Watkins. I think I read it all. Please join us also for the next Psychosocial Wednesday on March 12th, where Kathleen Kurgan will discuss with Glenn Slater, who will be presenting a very interesting talk about AI, posthumanism, and the collapse of inner ecology. Thank you very much for everyone to joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And thank you. Bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your attention. Take care. Thank you, Mansa. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.